Surviving the Survivor.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome back. Another very interesting show tonight. It has now been a month and 5 days since this quadruple homicide in Moscow, Idaho, as investigators continue to hunt for the killer. And here to discuss what is going on right now, two of the very best. On the top of your screen, you have Jennifer Coffindaffer. Her career in federal law enforcement spans over 28 years. It included extensive investigative, operational leadership, and training experiences. As an FBI special agent, she specialized in gang, narcotics, and organized crime. She helped dismantle, of all things, the Medellin cartel on that southern border as she was working in Fort Worth, Texas, and other areas. She also helped in the disruption of the gang, which you've all heard of, known as the Crips. And below her, Debbie Goodman, that is Dr. Debbie Goodman of St. Thomas University here in South Florida, a criminologist, a published author, educator, and former TV news host. And she returns and is our great booking producer, Steve Cohen, who makes everything happen behind the scenes. As he always says, repeat customers are best customers. So I already hope that Jennifer Coffindaffer will come back. A quick housekeeping note. It takes a tremendous amount of work to do this. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can go to Patreon and search for Surviving the Survivor. Carmela over here will be doing her very first virtual appearance for all patrons on January 5th at 8 p.m. You get a Holocaust survivor, you get a true crime addict, and a licensed therapist for 40 years. Now, as I like to do each and every time we're talking about the Moscow, Idaho murders, let's remember the victims' names, because this becomes a whodunit, and sometimes we forget those victims. So let us never forget the young lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogen, 21, Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin. And now on to news of the day. Really the latest information that we're getting right now is that Moscow, Idaho police are confident that the occupant or occupants of the white Hyundai Elantra that there was a bolo out for last week, be on the lookout, that they have critical information linked to the investigation. And so far, they say they have a list of 22,000 registered white Hyundai Elantras that fit the criteria that they are sorting through right now. Jennifer, to you, how big a lead is this potentially, this Hyundai Elantra, and how important is it to follow up, and how do you follow up 22,000 leads, Jennifer?
Well, I think based on what law enforcement has said and the amount of people and resources they have on locating this vehicle, it's very important. It's one of the vehicles that they obviously have not cleared that was in and around that scene. I would think that they have gone to the university and pulled permits to see if there's any Elantras that are permitted. I would think they have searched police records and state police records regarding citations that have been issued to Elantras. I would think they have checked parking violation records. I know I could think of so many instances in my career where we had partial information about a car. And these are kind of the rote steps you would take to figure out the license plate information regarding that. I would have also, and something they haven't done, I would have asked for anyone with a 2011 and 2013 Elantra that's in Idaho or the contiguous states to call in to dedicated lines at the command post. I would have that specially staffed so that they could start clearing some of these 22,000 owners of Elantras. I mean, simply just finding out the color when they call in, that's how brief of a call it could be. And then, of course, you have the registration information. They should have analysts, and I'm sure they do, pouring over each registered owner to try to start to pare down who is the owner of this Elantra.
Jennifer, another question. This is what I continue to be amazed at. How in the world do you organize this? So you've got Moscow PD, you've got state authorities, you have other local authorities, and then you have where you work for many years, the FBI, and you're talking about 22,000 potential registrations. How in the world do you organize this? Just take us kind of behind the scenes, behind the curtain for one moment.
Well, the first thing that happens is the invitation by the Moscow PD to even invite the FBI. The FBI has no prosecutorial jurisdiction. In other words, there's no federal crime here. But what they do have is resources, they have expertise, they have the most experienced investigators and all sorts of lab technicians, evidence scene technicians. In other words, they can bring to the party what's necessary to solve a crime like this more expeditiously. And Moscow, to their credit, quickly realized that. Also inviting again in state authorities. So essentially what happens and what happened here is a command post was set up. The individuals were assigned the case. So you have a federal agent that's going to be assigned the case agent on this case. Usually there's not more than one. There's one that answers to the investigative tactical decision making. And that person is going to hook up with the lead detective from Moscow and the lead detective from the Idaho State Police. They're going to get together and get on the same page on how to tackle this bear, because everybody has different ways and different things they're bringing to the table. The Bureau typically gets put in charge of the command post, gets put in charge of really the imaginations of what's going to be investigated, what the priorities are, triaging, clerks. This is a multifaceted investigation where they're not only looking at vehicles, they're looking at video, they're doing interviews, and they have subcomponents in each of those respective areas that are in charge of conducting those types or those parts of the case. As an example, you're going to have a crew that goes out to do the Sigma Chi interviews. And that way they're very familiar. It's going to be that same subset that does all those interviews. And remember, just to do an interview can take 4 hours. This is very tedious work. And then once you do the interview, you have to write it up, which can take another hour or two. Then you have to get it, submitted. Obviously, if it's anything really important, they're going to immediately get the attention of one of those 3 leaders that I talked about, the investigative leaders, and let them know. But it's a monster. Just even spewing all of that out, you can hear how difficult it is to do a case like this.
And I already have a zillion follow-up questions in my head, but I want to get to Dr. Debbie Goodman. The fact that someone has not come forward and said, oh, that's my car, does it make you more suspicious, or does it make it more likely, I should say, that whoever the occupant or occupants of this car is or are more likely to potentially be the killer or the suspect that police are looking for?
Certainly, that's indeed a possibility moving into a potential probability. But Joel, Carmela, Steve, if I may just take a moment to thank the 3 of you for the return invitation. I'm delighted to join you, and certainly with Agent Coffindaffer and her expertise and credibility and contribution. Thank you as well. So the vehicle, I think, is really a critical component to this entirety of the magnitude of this case. And people hesitate. Like, here I am in Florida, I'm looking at white Elantras, and I've seen quite a few. I've not seen any with the Idaho plates, but it's an interesting look because it's on our mind. So I would say, yes, the point that Agent Coffindaffer made about the research, the levels, the layers of threading who owns these vehicles. Yes, 22,000, that's an enormity, right, of a figure. However, everyone needs to be examined in terms of who owns these vehicles. And yes, somebody should come forward in terms of, I own a white Elantra, and let that be submitted. And there should indeed be a tip line just for the cars themselves.
So far, Jennifer, do we know if there's not a separate tip line just for this car? And you suggested that as well, right?
Yeah, that was my suggestion. I mean, that I would believe would have been done early on. not only to have dedicated tip lines for that because they have said how important this Elantra is, but also I have not seen a request for the actual individual owners to come forward. You know, we're asked if anybody's seen something. I would just cut to the chase. Come on, owners, call us up. Let us know your Elantra is really purple. Let us know you're a 90-year-old man and it's in the garage. Let us know the details about your Elantra. And then they can start whittling that down so quickly.
Carmela's giving me the secret hand signal real quickly. Usually when she's not here, I have cardboard cut out, but she's making a wonderful appearance, Carmela,
Right.
not cardboard cut out.
No,
Carmela, your
listen,
question.
I am not even pretending that I know anything about this, but if I were the guilty party, I would spray paint my Elantra blue
Good point, Carm.
and never leave the garage with it, okay?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I was going to say it's kind of interesting because crooks like to do that. You know, they like to cover it up. I've seen people scrape off their fingerprints, you know, try to, you know, get their car painted. You can't paint a car perfectly. Plus, everyone hopefully is starting to get in the know about this case. And it would be interesting if I run a detail shop and a car pulls in to get painted. Because I have seen, though, in a case, people actually try to spray paint a car. It's not a good situation because it makes it even more obvious. And just like cutting off the fingerprints, it makes it perfect because now they're even more distinctive just upon looking. You don't even need an examiner. So good question, but you can't hide. You can run, but you can't hide.
And Dr. Goodman, if I can call you Debbie, if that's okay with you, once you commit a crime, it's, as Jennifer just alluded to, it's not that easy to cover it up, right? It's not as simple as spray painting a car, right? You're going to eventually get caught in some misstep.
Absolutely. And that's my favorite part. And if I could, again, just commend Carmela, because it's the thought of the criminal. Yes, indeed. They're trying to cover their tracks, so to speak, trying to disguise, you know, what they know is going to be a pivotal issue as the car. But indeed, far and wide, these car, you know, services that do the painting and do the detailing and such, they too need to be on high alert for anyone who would come for that type of service and report it immediately. But for me, the best part here, A to Z, will be letter Z, when we've got somebody in handcuffs, in custody, that our local, state, and federal law enforcement officers and agents know that this is the individual. That brings a lot of closure, a lot of solid, you know, just almost like the exclamation mark on this case, particularly. Remember, we spoke on victimology last conversation, and the victims here too, secondary, would be, of course, the family members and the parents and the siblings, closest friends, tertiary, the rest of us, the society throughout the United States and beyond. We're just all with heavy hearts and grieving for what we know is beyond our wildest imagination and nightmare of a case. And those of us every day giving the analysis and commentary and discussion. And again, commendation, Joel, Carmela, Steve, for running this daily. This is important. We've got to be diligent, vigilant in bringing this to closure, and we'll do so. I feel strongly, I have no doubt that you know, the dedication, devotion, commitment of our law enforcement experts will reveal who this person is.
Thank you for the kind words. Jennifer, you mentioned Sigma Chi, and now I'm wondering, we're 4 weeks, 5 days in, is it safe to assume at this point, because you say it's such a tedious process, has every member of Sigma Chi at this point been interviewed, and has a report been written up for each of those interviews?
I would believe yes, because even if they're off campus, you know, the Bureau spans the world, and no matter where they're at, they're going to send what we call a lead out to an agent that would be where that individual is, and they're going to be interviewed. So I would think that all the fraternities and sororities on that campus, that those members have been interviewed. And that's because it's they're very, the Greeks are very interconnected. I was Greek. I'm not Greek, but I was part of the Greek system. And it's very intertwined in the college community. They do so many functions together. It's a social atmosphere and community in and of itself. And certainly our victims were connected and part of the Greek system. So it's important that they focus on that, because that could be the key to this case.
And that's an interesting point. So I spoke to a professor who actually works at the University of Idaho in the criminology department. I've spoken to people on the ground there. A lot of people, a lot of students particularly, did not come back after the murders, after Thanksgiving. So to your point, just to reiterate that, they're called leads. They will send out, if you're go to University of Idaho, but you live in Laguna Beach, California, just as an example, an FBI, and you're a member of Sigma Chi, an FBI agent has knocked on your door in Laguna Beach, California to interview. Is that what you're saying, Jennifer?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying those leads were cut and people are conducting those interviews. It's been working on 5 weeks now. And I would think the lion's share of these students have been interviewed.
So video, this is becoming kind of a thing we hear about daily in the news that could become very important. And I'm curious to get both of your perspectives on how important. We heard the other day about surveillance video from a convenience store. The clerk essentially, I believe she spoke to Fox News Digital and said, when the BOLO went out for the Hyundai Elantra, she said she took it upon herself during her graveyard shift to look through video surveillance and found something she believed to be this white vehicle at around 3:45 in the morning. And it took they believe a turn down a road. And now we're hearing more about video in the news. And that is that police got surveillance from a liquor store in a different part of Moscow, from the gas station where the video of the white car came from, both roughly a mile from the house, but in different directions. Dr. Goodman, how important could video be in solving the case?
Very, I think very important. You know, again, the whole idea of how do we identify who this individual is? Well, best case scenario, we would have some kind of a ring camera at the front door, the back door, some type of surveillance in the neighborhood from another neighbor. Well, at the moment, we didn't have that. It would have been fantastic if there was a witness, close proximity, identifying a car, a description of a person, a tag number. We don't have that. So at this point, I think whatever looks like, sounds like, feels like it could be a potential viable tip, then absolutely it's got to be explored in finite detail. And that's what our law enforcement experts are doing. So video, I think the digital deep dive is going to be critical on this as well. We have young people, the victimology, they're between the ages of 18 to 24. They're all 20 and 21. And as Agent Coffindaffer has stated, this is a very socialized group of young people, fraternities, sororities, parties, school interaction, but also the interaction, I think, on the social media platforms with Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and such, that can be very viable. TikToks.
And as a former special agent for the FBI, Jennifer, I know you don't miss a detail. So what do you make about the fact that the video surveillance was found in two different locations, two different directions? Does that tell you anything? How do you read that?
Well, having looked at the video, you know, at least what we can see publicly, I think they need to really do some, you know, deep dive analysis to make sure these cars are the car. You know, they're very fuzzy. It's very grainy. So in that regard, they have some homework to do. They need to send that off to the FBI crime lab, and they need to dial that in, get rid of the graininess, and try to make some close identification of both of those vehicles to make some determinations for certain.
And Jennifer, you always hear the FBI crime lab. Have you been to the FBI crime lab? What does it look like in there, and what goes on? How many people work there? How big a building? I'm curious about all this.
Huge. So it's in Quantico. And Quantico is where you train as a new agent, and then you go back to Quantico many, many times during your career for additional training. If you decide to, become a SWAT operator or a firearms instructor or an evidence tech. Anyway, all these different avenues that you can go, a blood spatter expert, you go back there to get all your additional or continuing training. So you're back there a lot. And that crime lab is back in Quantico. And it's near where the base is, or not base, meaning there's a military base too that's Quantico. And that, if you come off of 95 and you take a left, you go toward Marine Base Quantico. If you take a right, you go toward the FBI Academy, which is on a huge acreage and acres of land. There's Hogan's Alley there, which is where we practice all our practical applications. There's ranges there, indoor shooting, outdoor shooting. It's big. And anyway, that is where the lab is. And the lab is huge. We meaning, and I'm retired. I just wanted to make sure, doctor, you knew that. It's so kind of you to refer to me as agent, but you can just call me Jen. But doctor, your doctor stays with you forever. So
You can call me Debbie. That's okay too, but thank you.
But anyway, it's enormous. It's enormous, and it houses, I don't know the number, but dozens and dozens of technicians and specialists that do everything from tool marking, as I said, blood spatter, gambling analysis. I know somebody who worked on the gambling side of things in there. Everything, footprints, tire tracks, blood, DNA. It is unbelievable what that lab does. And I mean, I've just had incredible results. It really is the cornerstone of most cases. The lab comes into play.
I have a question. Because of the people that we interviewed, who are two women psychics, and I know from watching different programs that they are sometimes used by some police departments.
We just interviewed two psychic detectives who work on criminal cases for a little.
The question is, does the FBI ever use them?
I can tell you, in 25 years, I personally never sought the advice from a psychic. I can tell you that I am trying to see if I can find a situation where, in a case such as this, a psychic led to a subject. I still haven't found that. But my mind is.
I don't believe in it, but
it's a great plug for the show, Carm. That episode will be out next Thursday. I can't even do the math in my head, somewhere around the 24th. A pre-Christmas gift. You're going to hear from two psychic detectives. The reason we brought it up, Jennifer and Dr. Goodman, is we had Joseph Scott Morgan on the show, who's a nationally renowned forensics expert. And he mentioned that of the thousands of cases that he handled, on two of them, psychics were brought. And in one of the ones that the psychic worked, that psychic led investigators to within 50 feet of the body. So we got curious and we brought on some psychic detectives. But I want to switch now to
and wait a minute, I have to finish the psychic story. All my life I want to be rational And I pride myself that logic and rationality are my guides, but I'm still intrigued and curious with these psychics.
And that's another reason.
I'm totally intrigued and curious, and I have such an open mind, and I can't wait to watch your segment, because just hearing that there was an actual case where they led, to a body, I'm intrigued.
Well, these two women, and you'll see them on our show. I think it's the 23rd or 24th of December. You will see them on our show. They have both helped solve multiple criminal cases, and they've been all over the media. On to a report in the Independent, and also I believe NBC had this. There's one. Obviously, the families of the victims are grieving in a major way, and everyone handles grief in a unique way to themselves. But one family that seems to be grabbing the media spotlight over and over is Kaylee Goncalves' family. And there's two different incidents. I want to get both your takes on this. So Mr. Goncalves, Stephen Goncalves, basically came out and told the press, this is a quote now, "Imagine if you're a parent and you have pertinent information to this like that. You're asking me to just shut up. It's not going to happen," he said. Jennifer, to you, and then we'll get to what the wife said, but to you, how problematic is it that, because he's also released some details of the crime, according to him, that he says he got from the coroner. How problematic is it from your side of the fence as an investigator, former FBI, to have a grieving parent revealing information that could be sensitive and talking to the press?
Well, I first want to say and preface this by having two kids right now away at school in college. I truly can't imagine the grief that all these parents are feeling and suffering. These kids had their lives ahead of them, and it was just stolen right out from underneath them, having done nothing wrong, innocently taken from them. So first, I'm very empathetic toward the parents, but that is a different issue than the issue you're asking me about. And the issue you're asking me about, I will state factually, it does absolutely no good, and in fact can be harmful for an investigation to have a family releasing details about a crime. Let me take an example. Mr. Goncalves specifically stated that Maddie and Kaylee were in the same bed. That was a detail, I assure you, law enforcement wanted to keep close to the vest. They did not want that detail revealed, because now when they have a witness or somebody coming forward to give information and they talk about, well, Kaylee was in her room and Maddie was in her room and blah, okay. At that point, you know that they don't know the intimate details of the crime, and you're able to move on. Now, we don't know what witnesses know from the media versus what they know from their own personal knowledge, and take it a step further when they actually get somebody, a person of interest, and are interviewing them. And now you have this intimate detail and two other details that have been released, and you don't know where that came from. So it's crucially important they keep the facts very close to the vest in this if they're going to solve this case.
And one thing I learned, I am just a news guy that asks questions and tries to get as much knowledge as possible. But one thing I learned this week from another former FBI special agent, is it's not just investigating the case and finding a suspect. It's also being able to prosecute that case in a court of law, right, Jen?
Exactly. That's the number one thing. I had the best supervisor. I think I was so blessed with him. And when I first went to his squad as a baby agent, he called me in and he said, okay, I was on an organized crime drug squad. He said, I want you to take this book, and we took our MIOG and our MAOP, and he said, take these books, and I want you to understand what crimes you are investigating. I need you to legally understand the points of fact that it takes to prove these crimes. Because if you don't even know what you're looking for, how can you possibly investigate a crime if you don't know the legal parameters? The best thing anybody ever taught me, and that's how investigators look at these crimes. It's not just flying around, it's using your common sense and looking as your roadmap is, what are the points legally that I need to prove to get this person convicted of this crime?
Now, there's another Goncalves, not Kaylee or her dad, but the mother. Her name is Christy Goncalves. She spoke to a little show called The Today Show, which is obviously, I'm being sarcastic, a giant national network show, and said to The Today Show that she felt, quote unquote, left in the dark by police in the progress of the investigation. She refers to it as its sleepless nights. It's feeling sick to your stomach. Ms. Goncalves added that she can't help but fear that the murder will remain unsolved. And then she went on to say, my first thought just started being like, how long have they had this information when they released the information back to this white Elantra? She said, how long have they had this information? Where did they get this information? Was it on a camera? She said, the United States just found out the same time I did. So Dr. Goodman, to you first, I guess if you could address the same question. Obviously the parents are grieving, but it makes it difficult on the investigation, right?
Right. So as a criminologist, I deal with three other areas, if you will. It's almost the interrelationship among criminology, sociology, psychology, and victimology. So if we just go to victimology for a moment, I have had through the years interaction with families of murdered children. And I can tell you that these are among just the nicest, the most respectful, caring, concerned individuals I've ever met in my lifetime, personally or professionally. One case that stands out, Mr. Weinstein here in South Florida, who lost his daughter, Stacy. She was 9 years old. She was murdered by a carpet cleaning company. And not only is that the devastation to have lost the daughter in that manner, but also he was one of the accused. So he was one of my first families here with whom I had interaction. And now most recently in Florida, the last 5 years, I've been actively involved. Again, my platform, I don't like to say the names of murderers because I feel they tend to, and that's back to psychology. They like to hear their name. They like to be in the spotlight. They think they're grandiose and semi-famous. So I purposely, personally and professionally, don't want to use that name, but I have become friends and associates with some of those parents. And having said all of that, the compromise of the case is pivotal to these law enforcement officers and investigators and agents, because the revelation of some of these facts can absolutely taint and tarnish a case. But yet I have to look at the other side of the coin. The family members are in such extraordinary deep depths of despair, and it truly is for them a living nightmare. I mean, even for the rest of us, as we have these conversations, it's very difficult. There's hardship for all of us, because again, as an agent, and forgive me, I say agent, and I do that because out of respect and courtesy. So I know you're retired, and please allow me, if I may, to just express that respect. But nonetheless, they want some sense or sensibility to what's happened. They want some information. And we all know it's so illogical. We're all reasonable individuals. We're logical. Your viewers, I mean, I'm so impressed also with them and the interaction we've had and will continue to have. And everybody cares, but nobody cares more than these families. And I did see that episode, Joel, and the statement was, as you said, that she found out when the rest of the world found out. So there's some level of heaviness to that too. And I don't know if moving forward, or if it's even happening, if there could potentially be a liaison who is able to bring all the families together in whatever manner that is, whether that's actually face-to-face in a manner such as that, or whether it's on Zoom, just to somehow give a daily briefing as to what's happening on that day, and for those individuals only, not to be shared with anybody.
I'm glad you brought up our viewers, because they are the backbone of the show. They make everything, work like a fine-tuned machine. So we're going to get to viewer comments, and I'm going to read a bunch in just a moment. But Jennifer, I love it. You're raising your finger like the way my mother does. Go for it. Platform is yours.
Just a quick comment. The FBI has victim witness coordinators. Personally, I've dealt with them on every single case where there was a victim. You call them, you send them paperwork, they open a sub-file specifically related to the details of the case. They come on scene immediately. These people are unbelievable. They are the most empathetic, well-trained, caring individuals. They're not there to discuss fact. They are there to be there for the family, to help be a liaison between law enforcement and the victims. Mr. Goncalves actually talked about his interaction with one of these in one of his interviews. And so I feel very strongly and believe, and I know the state police has these. I don't know if they have as many as the FBI has. And I don't know if the Moscow Police Department has them, because they're so very small. But I believe, without a doubt, each of those families has an assigned victim coordinator. And that is exactly what they do. I think the impasse was they're not going to give information or facts about the case. And that's what the Goncalves family wanted. That's what they want. They want to be an intimate, intricate part. They want to be in the know. And it's really difficult, because that isn't how the FBI works. That is not going to happen. And the faucet has been turned off specifically since so much information was already leaked, if you will.
Trick question for you, which isn't really a trick question. We've all been talking. There has been a lot of speculation. You can't pretend that there hasn't been. Just about everything has been covered. You're both really seasoned at what you do. What hasn't been discussed that maybe should be discussed? Dr. Goodman, to you, I'm putting you on the spot. I know maybe there's nothing. I don't know.
No, I think that's a fantastic question. And again, I'm about the ruling out, ruling in, because when I'm asked to provide analytics and data and commentary, I like to be well-versed and think through, again, back to the A to Z. So for me, the ruling out part we've talked about, and we have information on that. Who's ruled out? The boyfriend, the roommates, the driver, and those with whom the victims interacted at the food truck. So now I really think the conversations have to be focused on the ruling in. Who is to be ruled in? So if we've ruled out the first tier, the first level, layer, circle of family members, friends, and such, we go to the next level, which I really feel strongly about this murderer being somehow associated with, not in a friendship manner, not even acquaintance manner. But again, I go back, Joel, Carmela, Agent Jennifer, to the socialization piece that exists on social media. People think they're first a fan of somebody, right? We're all the fans of somebody. It could be an athlete, an actress, an actor, an artist, musician. We're a fan. But then for me as the criminologist, is somebody moving into the fantasy. We go from fan to fantasy. Well, what does that look like? Potentially that looks like, oh, wow, this person is great. I love this person. I'd like to meet this person. Well, how can somebody realistically love somebody that they don't even know? And then the third tier is the fanatic. So fantasy, fanatic, for me as the criminologist, the fanatic now has the homicidal ideation and is thinking about, planning, premeditated, willful, with malice, going down the list of first-degree murder. Yes, Mrs.
I knew
Walker?
Carmen would raise her hand. It's right up her alley.
I
Thank-
wonder as one of the techniques when they're trying, when a case is not solved and they're already 4 weeks, and I know it's a very short time, but does it ever happen where they sit around the round table, let's say the FBI agents, and they say, okay, let me hear what's your fantasy, and then let me hear which way would your fantasy take you, the FBI agents, and let me hear because I'm sitting here right now and I have a fantasy about this, which way I am thinking.
Carm,
okay?
interesting. Jennifer, that's for you, I guess. Is there a point where the FBI agents and other investigators get together
Just
and
like a
think,
brainstorm.
yeah, I think she means brainstorm or try to think outside the box,
Yes.
Jennifer, about possibilities?
So at the end of each shift change, so you're going to have, whether they're working the 6 to 6 or the 8 to 8 or 7 to 7, that's when you have your big shift change and you're going to have your discussions. And then you're also going to have, of course, a set of discussions with the higher ups where you're going to go back and discuss with your bosses. And remember, each FBI agent, each state agent, they could have 10, 20 years experience. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years experience that is going into this case right now. So to your point, there's certainly going to be discussions. Mostly the formal, though, right now, these agents and officers, they are overwhelmed with evidence and information, and they're just trying to make their way through that. So they're trying to look at those avenues rather than really thinking outside the box, I think right now. Right now, we know there were 50 search warrants. They didn't even discuss subpoenas. I can't even imagine the number of subpoenas. And now they're getting the returns of all that. So hundreds of pages of paper to review and images to look at. It's overwhelming. So they're just trying to make their way through the evidence right now. I think if things ever get colder, but this is a hotbed of evidence right now. So I would say not now, other than in their boot ride going on an interview.
Can always count on my mom to take us down a strange path about her fantasy, but we'll leave it there. So on to viewer comments for a few moments. We'll get through a bunch and then we will wrap it up. You are both excellent, as you are as well, Carmela. First comment from Loney 3100. And this goes directly to what Jennifer was kind of just talking about through serendipity. I didn't plan this, but this person writes, I hope the first responders are okay. I've been thinking about them a lot. Imagine being called to a residence following a call about someone being unconscious, and at the scene you walk into a quadruple murder. They might have PTSD after this or even quit their jobs. I really wish them strength. So Agent Jennifer, you're the one that's come up on grisly crime scenes, firsthand. How tough is it, and how empathetic should we be to these first responders right now?
I mean, we need to be empathetic. Definitely. It's tough, but I would say it took me about 10 years. And after about 10 years, I was truly able to completely compartmentalize. I could go home, be soccer mom, have my sippy cups out, watching TV with my husband, and just pretty much block out until I got that next call, everything I saw that day. Right. And these first responders, and, my background, I'm a tactical medic and an EMT too. So being in that realm, I'll never forget my first call out was a woman that had been stabbed numerous times. And very interestingly, though, she was just screaming, telling us all who did it. So they weren't lethal stab wounds. But in regard to that question, I really appreciate that this person has thought of something that actually on Twitter, in the news, I haven't heard anybody mention. And certainly it affects you. but in time you learn to compartmentalize, but you're never bothered. You're never not bothered by those scenes, and you can't forget anything. You can't erase it. So it's always there.
Carmi, imagine you're in college, you're dating a young woman, and then you find out her mother is a former FBI special agent, tactical units, scary
I
stuff.
think the young man would be very careful
I
in
wouldn't
that.
mess around with that. You better watch out there, buddy. Next comment comes from Chico's Mummy, which leads me to believe this is a Canadian or a Brit. And this is right up your alley, Dr. Goodman. The profiling I'm seeing coming through all more or less seem to agree on rage and revenge, slighted, rebuffed, treated badly in their mind, known to victims in some way, a young male. I think the cops are circling in now, even if they say they don't have a suspect publicly. Is Chico's Mummy on the right track, do you think, as a criminologist?
I think so, and I appreciate the depth of intellect again and connecting the dots here. So I would say absolutely yes, and why the yes for me would be because of the weapon, and I know we've talked about that on your platform and other media platforms, but the weapon of choice, the victim, the day, the time, all of this is very selective. So to be able to kill 4 people with this type of fixed blade knife is what we're referring to it, what law enforcement officials are saying about this weapon. It also suggests to me the contact and the touch, meaning when that murderer has selected that weapon, it is close proximity, it requires contact and touch between murderer and victim, much like strangulation, like drowning, like smothering. The gun, however, one can be a considerable distance away, and we regard it more on the impersonable type of scope and scale. So yes, indeed, I agree with the colleague who's suggesting the level of enrage and outrage. But what I don't think, and I was a guest on a TV platform this morning, and the question was, well, is it possible, just possible, that somebody, was in a road rage situation and upset somebody and they took some kind of irresistible action? I do not think that is this scenario. I absolutely think this is right down the line of first-degree murder with the planning, the premeditation, willful and malicious. And yes, to the colleague, absolute rage to carry this out this way.
Next comment is for you, Carmela. Deep Diver 1398. My father was a Holocaust survivor. Love your show and great guest. This is by far the saddest case because we are seeing these parents grieve. It's horrible pain to overcome. I don't think you can ever heal from such sadness, not to bring people down, but you lost your father to a gas chamber in Auschwitz. You lost a child. Can you heal from such sadness?
Well, I mean, what's your definition of heal? Heal in the sense of going on with your life and having wonderful times. Yes, you can heal. But it's very different what happened to this person, to these parents, because they had already when I lost a child, it wasn't formed. It wasn't really, I didn't have a history. These people have a grown child who was already almost launched, how do they say?
Almost out of the nest.
Almost, and they had 20 years of interaction, 21 years of interaction. The parents are getting older and they pin all this hope on the children.
Interesting analysis.
I think it's much harder than my situation, much harder.
Carmela lost a child when he was 3. On to the next comment, not to bring everyone down on an already sad subject.
This guy was born afterwards.
And I made the world so happy.
And that's quite spoiled.
Next comment from Cuban. This is for you, Agent Jen. For the love of God, will some of these experts explain to us how the killer was able to exit the house without leaving a blood trail. This has come up many times.
Many
so
times.
Jen, your take on this?
Well, I think there's a couple things we have to consider. One, was he so prepared that he actually had some sort of footwear, booties, something like that, and he just slipped them off and left them there? We don't have any evidence that we know in the public light, but it's something we have to consider. This would have been a hot mess, bloody situation. He would have been completely bloodied, and his clothes, and I agree, there would have been blood potentially on the floor. And so you want it explained. I would explain it by perhaps he had covering. Perhaps, remember, we have been told they were asleep in their beds. So this was a complete ambush of strikes. And I would believe that most of the blood was absorbed by the mattresses and were on the walls and were on the victims and on him, as opposed to actually getting down to the floor in the middle of these attacks. So it is also possible that there just wasn't a lot of blood pooled on the floor. Remember, this is pretty quick, these stabbings. So I don't know if there was enough time allotted for that to happen. It's also possible he cleaned up. It's possible. Very risky, but possible.
And we just had a guest on, and I knew the answer to this, and now I'm forgetting because I've done 40 shows in 5 minutes, but talked about a specific case where the person you know what? It was Monica Jordan. She's a private investigator out of Tallahassee, worked a case where the suspect, the killer, killed, I believe it was his family. I might be wrong about this, but I do know that the killer simply put on Walmart plastic bags on their shoes, and that helped elude police for a long time and didn't leave much of a trail. So she said it could be something as plastic bags. Carmela.
Okay, again, I am tangential, something on hooks.
Carm loves to take us off the beaten path.
Yes, I always take us. There were these unsolved murders in Oregon where the husband was killed and the wife was almost killed. And this was a year ago. And I'll Google it because I want to know. It sounds like it has a lot of similarities. And that's where my thoughts go.
Jen, Oregon and Idaho close together. Our FBI agents, are leads going out and revisiting these cases?
Apparently in that case, the husband protected the wife when the stabbing started, and they were supposed
Yes, I know which case you're referring to now.
and they were supposed to go to Hawaii, and they had a dog sitter who slept in their house and heard the commotion and woke up, and then the murderer left before killing the wife, so the wife survived, not in a happy state. But
so Jen, should our FBI special agents, are they going out to Oregon and these other places and revisiting?
The case was not resolved.
Jennifer is shaking her head no. Why not?
I'm saying no. These are unrelated. This, as the doctor put it so perfectly, this in my belief, it's personal, it's angry, it's built up rage. And I'm also judging the fact that law enforcement has said, this is not random. This isn't a random act. So I believe they have evidence to point to the fact that it's not random. So taking that fact that we're given in conjunction with what occurred, I don't think this has anything to do with the other sort of similar cases, but it's a great question.
Next comment comes from Ali Sayab, and they write, it has literally taken, this is for you, Dr. Goodman, it has literally taken all the strength that I have to not just scream because of all these people throwing all of this pressure on these police. It's been relentless, and it's been absolutely ridiculous and uncalled for. People sitting in their living rooms online bashing these police when they have no clue as to the massive amount of evidence, leads, tips, information that they have to go through. This is not some easy task where they can wave a wand and everything is done and sewn up in a day. The media has been so stupid in their coverage of this case, probably referring to me as well. Dr. Goodman, how tough is it? And again, how much sympathy and patience should we be having?
Right. Well, let me also just take a moment to, if I may, thank and acknowledge our nearly 1 million, as we speak in 2022, nearly 1 million local, state, and sworn officers, agents who I truly feel are just amazing individuals, again, individually and collectively, for the type of work that they do, their devotion, their dedication, their commitment. So I understand and appreciate the magnitude of what's happening here. And I know that unfortunately there has been negative commentary among individuals who think that these individuals who are in charge of the case are not doing enough. But because it's such an enormity of what's happening, as Agent Jen and Carmela have both stated, this is just beyond our worst nightmare here. And yet here we are, it's real. And I believe they're doing their best, and there should be compassion and composure and some level and attitude of gratitude for what our law enforcement experts are doing. We're 30 days in. I know for some people it feels like a long time, but again, we can't compare and contrast the apple to the orange. And we may have seen a documentary or know of a case where it was solved in hours or in a couple of days. But once again, those are those best case crime scene scenarios where practically, you know, all that we need is right there to be able to lead us to who did this. But this one is very complicated, very complex. But again, I have the utmost faith in our professionals, and I truly believe, I have no doubt that this case will be solved, and we will see on every platform an individual in handcuffs who's in custody, being detained, and moving through our criminal justice system, and hopefully in a severe, swift, and certain manner.
Let's hope that day comes sooner than later. The next comment comes, yes, Carmela. The next comment comes from Sean Shea. A couple more comments. Do you know if tracking dogs, this is for you, Jen, do you know if tracking dogs were used to try to pick up the killer's scent and path of escape? I'm not sure if that would even work, but I was wondering if it was attempted or if it could have led to a home or where a car was parked.
I don't believe dogs were used in this case. You would have to have the scent of the person that needed to be tracked. And so I think it would be very difficult. We all know this was a party house. This was frequented by many people in a constant track of people going in and people going out, even in the proximity of time as this occurred. So I do not believe, I have not received any information, and I wouldn't have guessed that that would have been a go-to.
And a final question here, and then I'll let you get some last thoughts. This came up. We had a retired profiler who worked for the Canadian police in British Columbia. He talked about how in Canada, surveillance cameras are registered. And so this commenter, whose name just goes by user, writes, I'm in Dallas. The police have a register of citizens with cameras on their property, similar to what this gentleman, Jim Van Allen, mentioned having in Canada. This doesn't exist, I don't think, Agent Jen, but should it in every jurisdiction?
Well, you know, I guess it could. It would be a huge bureaucracy to set up and handle and manage. It's a privacy thing too. I think some people don't want you to know they have their cameras up, but they have their cameras up. I think that this particular town, this particular situation, my understanding is almost no one had a camera. This is a sleepy, sweet little town in Idaho. You're quite a central college town. And my understanding is until this happened, people didn't have cameras, at least in large part. So should there be some, bureau set up to manage everyone who has a Ring camera? I don't know. It seems like a lot of taxpayer money, and I don't know. My taxes are too high as it is.
It gets complicated. So we've gone through many of the comments. I'd like to give you each a chance for a final thought. To you, Dr. Goodman, first. Where are we? Where do we go from here? You already said you believe the killer will be caught.
Absolutely. I have no doubt. Where do we go from here? We, and now I say we to extend and expand the law enforcement community, but we, the community, to remain diligent, vigilant in what we may see. You know, the see something, say something is going to be critical. We've got to believe that individuals know something and they need to come forward, even if they think it's some minuscule item and it's nothing of relevance. Let's let the experts decide that, because there's a lot of threading that goes on, and what somebody thinks could be minute could be very important.
Agent Jen, final thought, where we are now. Do you also think this killer will be caught, and where do we go from here?
Okay, really quick, I do want to say thank you so much for having me on your show. I want to say to Carmela, as I mentioned to your son previously, you just have so much respect for me. Everything that happened during the Holocaust was just very, very dear to me. I've studied it, did research papers on it because it meant so much. So thank you for having me on your show. And doctor, it's been a pleasure getting your insight.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on our show.
And you'll both, I just want to know that you'll come back, Agent Jen, will you?
Of course.
I have you on the record. So, all right.
I'm on the record, but back to your question. So down to business now. For those of you familiar with a very recent case in the news, Quentin Simon. I don't know if you're familiar. It was a little 20-month-old baby that was bludgeoned to death. She was just indicted yesterday by the mother, thrown in a trash dumpster. The trash dumpster went to a huge dump. Okay, this is why this is relevant. As weeks droned on, everybody doubted, well, how do they know it went into a dumpster? How do they know he just didn't fall in the pool and accidentally die? How does law enforcement know? And then everybody said, well, this case is never going to get solved. Look at her. She's out. She could run away. She could escape, And then the FBI came in, and the ERT, evidence response team, came in and spent weeks at a dump, a huge dump, combing through trash. And trash just doesn't go this way and that way. Trash goes this way. So meticulously pouring through in the worst conditions possible. After about 3 weeks of tedious combing, they found the remains of that little boy. And what I said at that time, when on Twitter, when everybody was just smashing the police for incompetence, they're never going to solve this, the FBI is never going to do this. It'll happen. It's going to take patience. This case is a tedious one. They have a lot to go through. Have some faith.
Very well said. And that just very quickly, I'm going to end with this. I learned something else from Joseph Scott Morgan, a great guest on our show, who's a forensics expert. These landfills where the garbage goes are not random. They appear to be random, but they are gridded out. So your garbage essentially goes to, from my home, goes to basically the same area on the landfill each and every time for precisely these sorts of reasons. That's how well thought out all of this is. If something were to happen, they then know basically where in the landfill, it's a grid essentially to search. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Both of you are fascinating guests. The woman on the top of the screen with that awesome Jack Russell, I think, right next to her is Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, almost 30 years experience. She helped get rid of the Crips in Fort Worth, Texas, and told the Medellin cartel to buzz off. And below her, Dr. Debbie Goodman of St. Thomas University, a criminologist. Don't you worry. We'll be back soon enough with another episode of Surviving the Survivor. Love you, America.